Welcome back to Outside Views. Today we're tackling a topic that's been reported widely and is stirring conversations on both sides of the English Channel: the gradual normalization of post-Brexit relations. After years of strained relations and tough negotiations, we're beginning to see what some would call the first steps towards healing the post-Brexit shards, the fragments of a relationship that was deeply altered by the UK's decision to leave the EU. Now, a key focus of this normalization is the recent defence agreement between the UK and Germany, signed in the historic Trinity House in London. On the surface, this new defence partnership may seem like a simple move to strengthen military cooperation, but there is far more to it than just that. It represents a cautious step toward rebuilding trust and collaboration with Europe. And, as many in the media have noted, this agreement also highlights just how dramatically the geopolitical landscape has shifted since Brexit. Today, we're going to dive into the specifics of this agreement, why it's possible now, why Brexit made it necessary, and how this is just a minor repair when compared to the broader challenges left in the wake of Brexit. First, let's look at what this defense agreement actually entails. Under this new arrangement, Germany and the UK are setting up a series of collaborative defense initiatives, including the establishment of a new factory for artillery equipment by Rheinmetall in the UK. This factory will create over 400 jobs manufacturing advanced artillery equipment in Britain and will add to the work Rheinmetall already does in the UK producing armored vehicles. Additionally, the German Air Force is set to station reconnaissance planes in Scotland, specifically designed to track Russian submarines in the North Atlantic. The two countries also plan to work jointly on developing long-range weaponry and drones, areas in which both countries have expressed a need for advancement. It's a comprehensive defense collaboration that extends across the military branches, from ground forces to air defense, naval intelligence, and even cyber defense. But the timing of this agreement is no coincidence. As the UK Defence Minister John Healey stated, both countries share the values of defending freedom, and with new threats in Europe, particularly from Russia, the need for solidarity and cooperation has become urgent. Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius echoed this sentiment, saying that given the aggressive policies of President Putin, Germany and the UK are practicing an alternative: solidarity and mutual trust. Both countries are among the largest contributors of military aid to Ukraine and recognize that Europe's security is no longer guaranteed. But here's the thing: this agreement is a perfect example of how Brexit has redefined what's possible and what's necessary. This bilateral agreement between the UK and Germany was achievable because in defense, the EU doesn't require centralized decision-making in the same way it does with trade and economic policies. When it comes to trade, the EU requires collective agreements, which is why the UK can't form individual trade deals with EU member states like Germany. However, in defense, there at the moment is more flexibility. Individual EU countries are, of course, able to pursue bilateral defense agreements as long as they align with broader EU and NATO policies. Brexit has in effect made these types of bilateral agreements not just possible, but essential. The UK no longer enjoys the automatic defense collaboration mechanisms it once had as part of the EU. As a result, new structures have to be created from scratch. And this is why we see defense collaboration emerging as a first step in what could be a long road toward normalization. It's an area where the two sides can work together without directly challenging EU policy. And in this sense, defense cooperation is a logical starting point for the UK and for Germany. It allows them to establish a working relationship on common goals without crossing any legal or regulatory boundaries imposed by Brexit. However, while defense might be a promising path for cooperation, it's worth emphasizing that this is only a minor repair compared to the larger damage that Brexit inflicted On the UK-EU relationship, Brexit fundamentally changed how Britain interacts with its European neighbours. It's no longer part of the EU's decision-making process, nor does it benefit from the streamlined access to the European market that once existed. And these changes have left the UK and the EU in many ways working from a fragmented foundation. Take trade, for instance. Despite close geographical proximity and a long history of economic interdependence, Brexit has made it nearly impossible for the UK and Germany to strike their own bilateral trade agreements. Instead, any economic deal has to go through the EU, involving all member states and adhering to the EU's regulatory frameworks. The UK's decision to leave has removed the flexibility it once had to negotiate these economic arrangements directly. And yet, this defence agreement shows that there is still a foundation of shared interests strong enough to begin piecing together the post-Brexit shards. The new Labour government under Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been taking steps to repair some of these relations, not only with Germany but also with the EU as a whole. In his first 100 days in office, Starmer has made a point to visit key European allies, pushing for deeper collaboration and opening dialogues on areas like defence, science and trade. The idea is to stabilise and normalise relations with Europe and to show that, while Brexit may have been a divisive process, there is still an avenue for cooperation. But, as many are pointing out, these are only the initial steps. Defence collaboration, as important as it is, won't bring back the ease of movement or the economic fluidity that the UK enjoyed within the EU, nor does it restore the rights and protections that British citizens previously had across the continent. The shards of Brexit still remain, and they are deeply embedded in the UK's political, economic and social landscape. For example, in science and technology, Brexit has hampered the UK's access to critical EU research programs. And in economic terms, British businesses continue to face barriers when trading with the EU, a reality that has spurred calls to cut Brexit red tape. This defence agreement, therefore, while symbolic and significant, addresses only one part of a much broader issue. If anything, it highlights the challenges that remain and the limitations that Brexit has imposed on the UK's ability to form deep, multifaceted agreements with its European neighbours. For British citizens, especially those who are used to a more interconnected Europe, this shift has been difficult. And while the new defence cooperation with Germany might evoke a sense of partnership, it's a far cry from the close-knit relationship the UK once has had as part of the EU. It's important to recognize the intent behind this move. Starmer and his government are showing a clear willingness to engage with continental Europe and to find points of collaboration. But even as we discuss normalization, it's clear that this is not a return to the past. The UK and the EU are building a new relationship on a very different foundation, one where the scope and depth of cooperation will depend heavily on what's achievable within the limits set by Brexit. In closing, this defence agreement is a promising sign, a minor repair in a much larger framework that's still fractured from the Brexit process. It shows that, despite the setbacks, there is room for shared goals and mutual support between the UK and Germany, and perhaps the EU at large. But the reality is that these kinds of agreements are piecemeal. They address specific needs rather than building a cohesive partnership across the board. And for those who see Brexit as a mistake, like me, this defence agreement underscores just how much has been lost. The post-Brexit landscape has forced the UK into a position where even basic cooperation now requires a diplomatic dance. In the end, while normalization is possible, it's clear that the path forward will be incremental, with each new agreement attempting to address a small part of the overall damage. And if you want to see another video, the next one is right here in the end screen.